Welcome to the Square Circle. I'm your host, Nan Khan. Joining us today are Gregory Clay of gdclay.com, conservative writer and editor Brian McNichol, and Isaiah Poole of the Campaign for America's Future. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you.
Yes.
This week, two nurses who cared for the Liberian Ebola patient in Dallas tested positive for the virus. One was wearing protective gear, while the other was not, even taking a commercial flight from Cleveland despite having symptoms associated with the virus. The Centers for Disease Control continues to assure the American public that the situation is under control, but these latest revelations undermine this effort. Gregory Clay, how much confidence do you have in the CDC to keep the virus from spreading further on American soil?
Well, it's obvious that the Obama administration is not too confident about the situation because, of course, the big news on Friday was the naming of Ron Klain as the quote-unquote Ebola czar. That's the big news of the week. And President Obama obviously bowed to the pressure. He was getting so much pressure all week from Republicans, from the media, especially Fox News. I know Bill O'Reilly called for Dr. Frieden, head of the CDC, to resign, et cetera, et cetera. And also, by naming Mr. Klain, it further adds some drama to the situation because it politicizes the Ebola crisis. I mean, here's a guy who was on the staffs of two vice presidents, Mr. Gore and Mr. Biden. And he also worked with Janet Reno. So you infer that he's a Democrat. And people say, well, he knows how to work with Republicans and he's dealt with them before. But the thing about it is, if you want to have a real face of this, especially now because we don't have a Surgeon General, which is a whole nother story in itself. But, I mean, Mr. Klain is a politician, you know, and if you want to go that route, why not name someone who has clout and who has dealt with crises before? And also, it would have given President Obama a golden opportunity if he would have named someone else with a stronger figure to head to be the Ebola czar. That's why, to me, the perfect person for this gig, ideal person for this gig, if he chose to accept it, like the Mission Impossible show from the 60s, would have been Rudolph Giuliani. You know, Rudolph Giuliani would have been ideal for this gig because he knows crisis.
So, Gregory,
in 2001, the terrorist attacks
are you
in
confident
New York,
in the CDC's ability to keep the Ebola spreading on U.S. soil?
No, I'm not, and that's why Ron Klain was named the Ebola czar. You know, it's obvious that the Obama administration is not confident, and it's obvious that the CDC has some issues. I mean, you could tell that if you watch the hearings this week regarding the Ebola situation and the CDC. I mean, the CDC has some major problems. But I still say to have a crisis manager in this situation, the ideal person would have been Rudolph Giuliani. To restore something, I mean, your question is about confidence. I think Rudolph Giuliani would be a perfect person to restore that lost confidence.
You look like you wanted to chime in, Isaiah.
If Rudolph Giuliani was willing to suit up and go down to LaGuardia Airport and do stop and frisk operations of people coming from West Africa, maybe you're right. But I don't think that's what we're talking about here. I think what we're talking about here is someone who can come in and who has the capacity to work with the various government agencies, both federal, state, as well as state and local. And
so you feel it's beyond the CDC's scope?
Well, since we're talking about not only the Centers for Disease Control, but we're also talking about the National Institutes of Health, we're talking about 50 different state health boards, and in some cases even city health agencies. And all of these things have to be coordinated. These resources have to be coordinated. And so a person who has that type of expertise in an intergovernmental relationships will be the type of person that you will want in there. I don't think a high-profile politician, whether it's a Rudolph Giuliani or my list, any one of my list of favorite politicians, would necessarily have been the right choice. Let's see if Mr. Klain has what it takes to do the job.
I thought it was interesting that they came up with someone who has no medical background. What I know of Ron Klain is he gets high marks. He was an effective chief of staff for Gore and Biden and his other Washington jobs. Highly regarded guy, knows how to work within government's marshal resources. I don't think Giuliani would have been a crazy choice either, but Giuliani is a more lightning rod character. It might have gotten to be more about him than the process. I wasn't, I'm still thinking about it.
So it's more important at this time to be about the process than to assure.
Yeah, these are cyclical things. We're already working on dealing with it, right? There's a vaccine out there close to being used or being tried elsewhere. We're tracing these people. We're shutting them, shutting down the mistakes. Yes, we had a nurse who wasn't wearing the proper clothing, right? But no more nurses are going to be in that position. And it's like we had the DC sniper a few years ago. It was totally, we couldn't cope with it. And then as it went on a few weeks, we started realize, we had the tarps at the gas stations and all that. You come up with stuff, and it's not, not many people are sitting around right now, or sitting around 5 years ago saying, man, if Ebola breaks out, what do we do? Not many people have worked on that problem, and the ones who have, there are some, the ones who have, the ideas haven't been tested in the real world. So these things, you always make some mistakes, but you can see real progress already, I think.
Thanks, Brian. I'd like to remind our audience that you can submit your questions to our guests through our website, www.publicsquare.net, and we'll answer as many as we can live on air toward the end of the show. Continuing on the topic of Ebola, there has been about the media coverage of the situation. Shepard Smith of Fox News criticized his own network this week, the latest of several claims that the media in general has been sensationalistic in its coverage. On the other hand, if the media ignored revelations about the 2 nurses in Dallas, would that be responsible? Isaiah, what's your take on the media's coverage of this Ebola situation?
The enterovirus has killed more people than Ebola. There's something called the hantavirus, which has killed 2 people so far, and there are several hundred cases of people that have been diagnosed.
SARS.
There are more people have died from the flu than have died from Ebola. So in that respect, the coverage has been over the top. Ebola gets the coverage it gets because we have this fascination with things like that. I watched a show a few months ago called The Last Ship, which is about an Ebola-like epidemic that sweeps the globe, and most of the survivors are in this one naval ship that is out at sea. So we gravitate toward these kinds of things, and cable news understands that we gravitate towards those kinds of things. They appeal to our primal fear. There is the deadly seriousness of the epidemic in Africa that we as a global community are going to have to do a much better job to come to grips with. And I think one of the things about dealing with the health crisis in Africa is coming to grips with some of the holes in our own health system here in America. I would like, for example, that in Texas, there is no law that says that a person who works at, say, a restaurant or something like that in Texas can take sick leave. That's a huge incentive, that if you are ill, to go to work sick, especially if you're a low-wage worker. And that is the kind of thing that's one of the things that keeps me up at night. Another thing that keeps me up at night is the states that have not adequately funded health care for lower-income people. which again discourages people who are susceptible to any of these diseases from going in and getting prompt care.
Anyone else want to weigh in?
On the meeting, I think we say, one of the things you said earlier was this thing has become politicized, and it has. It's amazing how quick there gets to be a right view and a left view of these things, and then how they're a middle or a not either one of those emerges.
Right.
And I think that's where the space Shepard Smith was going for. Be vigilant about tracing the cases and isolating the people and caring for them and so forth. But the idea of stopping flights. I mean, my friend, the travel agent, tells me you can literally count on one hand the flights that take off from West Africa and land in the United States in a week. Like he said, the Ghana Airlines used to have landing slots here, but one time the plane was 1 week late arriving. So they said, okay, we can't, you're out, right? You got to show up better than that. So that's one of the things that happens there is, what do we say, okay, we're not going to let anybody fly here from there. Okay, you're talking about screening people in Frankfurt, all over the world, all these places that people go to transfer here. And it's a bigger project, and it's probably not, we're still handing out visas. Right. Embassies are Liberia, Sierra Leone, giving out visas.
Yeah, it's a major issue.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the problem with Ebola, the reason why it's taken over the news cycle, because, all this week, there's been two stories, Ebola and ISIS, and there's been in the country, they get very little play. It's amazing. But I think the problem with Ebola, people are fascinated with it. Why? Because it's a mystery. Yeah. It's like a mystery illness, and people, especially in the United States, are fascinated with mysteries. With TV mysteries, mystery novels, etc., because it seems that the narrative keeps changing. Some people seem, say, you can't get it if you do this, but then other things happen, and the equation changes. Furthermore, President Obama is part of this mystery too, because remember, what did he do a few weeks ago? In a speech, he said it's highly unlikely we will see Ebola in the United States. That's not too cool. Look what's happening. Now we see Ebola in the United States.
Three confirmed cases at this point. But I think the mystery thing is an important point.
Very important.
That's a big factor in the coverage of it.
We are programming our television news channels as if they are mystery shows instead of information vehicles.
Just about health. Yeah, because people know about the flu. People know about pneumonia. Ebola comes out of left field.
It's just touching people on the shoulder. There's one in Mobile now, and then somebody threw up at the Pentagon today. And there's a hazmat team.
Exactly. And people go, when you hear about things like, vomit and diarrhea, dozens of people respond. Dozens of people drop everything and go running out.
It's inflammatory for sure.
Automatically.
Yeah. There were some other stories this week in the news. Another story this week involves the gathering of the Catholic Church leaders in Rome this week. The Synod on the Family is revisiting questions about divorced and cohabitating couples. But the one that's getting the most attention is a statement by the leader of the Synod signaling a change in approach toward homosexual persons. However, several people within and outside the Synod have criticized the document, saying that it strays from the church teaching. Brian, could you help us out on this?
Okay. As a Catholic, what has happened, and did not start with Pope Francis, started with Pope Benedict, is the church wrestling with the question of what do we do with people who, divorced, remarried, but want to come to church. My old boss's wife, remarried, devout Catholic, went to Mass every day, couldn't go to communion. What do we do about those people? They are trying to stay close to God. They know they've done something or don't know they've done something or whatever, but whatever it is, they're approaching the church saying, please let us be the conduit to God that I understood you to be. And so the church is like, okay, what do we do? Do we tell people you have sinned, walk away, we never want to see you again? Or do we, you know, what's between that and yes, you can do anything you want and still be a member of the church? And that continuum, you know, there's movement on that continuum. That's what's going on. You're always wrestling with what do you do with the sinner.
Yeah, but isn't this a situation about language, from what I understand?
Well, there was
not.
right.
No, I'm sorry. It's doctrine as well as language, and how you reflect that doctrine in your practice. I'm not a Catholic. I am a Christian. I have wrestled with these questions all my life and have come out on one side of it, which is that I can be Christian and can be gay, and I am married to a person who happens to have a theology degree from Harvard, and has been a minister in church was a minister in the United Methodist Church. And so from my point of view, the kind of thing the message that Pope Francis is trying to send, which doesn't touch the core of the doctrine, but acknowledges that there are gay and lesbian people who are sincerely trying to have a relationship with Jesus Christ. And we should figure out how to acknowledge that, how to embrace that, and how to deal with people who call themselves Christians as members of the Christian family, even though we don't totally understand them, even though we don't agree with them 100%.
So you're saying that it is about language to a certain extent?
Well, what happened was they wrote it in Italian,
right?
And then the Americans, you know, said, wait a minute, we didn't vote for any of this, right? The American bishops who were in on this were from the conservative wing of the church, which has been in ascending since the Obamacare.
But that was
debate.
interpreted
the
way
liberal
in
wing
English, right?
Got pounded on for backing Obamacare.
Right.
Okay. So they're like, hey, we're gonna when we translate this into English, it's gonna say what we want it to say. So we're and there's some. I mean, it's like accept instead of.
Well, part of it is welcoming versus providing.
Yeah, welcoming.
Welcoming homosexual persons.
That's what it was.
Or do you say providing for homosexual persons?
Right.
So there's obvious a language gap here, and word usage gap, and Italian versus English and English versus Italian.
I don't know if that's so much, and you know this because you're a Catholic, but I don't see that so much as a language gap. I think it's precisely what you said it does. That there are conservative bishops in the Catholic Church who do not want to move in this direction and want to stop it by any means necessary,
or at least slow it. I think they're on. It's going to happen, right? The church is moving this way, and they're negotiating the terms of surrender, basically, or maybe that's a little strong, but they're wanting this to go in a disciplined way instead of just zip all the way to the other end. I also thought that the part about they're also doing this with cohabiting couples, remarried couples. That's been a big issue for a long time, and what happens now is people do it, and you get back in by writing a check. They don't say that. They call it, you get your marriage annulled. But I mean, you had 3 kids. How do you annul a marriage with 3 kids, right? So I mean, that's part of what this is that they find a way to get them off the hook for a donation. So it shouldn't be sold. It's not something that should be sold.
I have a question for you. What does it feel like when, given the position of the Pope and how the Pope is held in the Catholic Church, how does it feel when you have a Pope that at least has a very significant tone from the predecessor? How does that feel to you?
Well, what I always say about that is this. Okay, like for instance, abortion versus death penalty, right? The Catholic Church is against both, right? They're against death penalty, against abortion. But in abortion, the Pope has spoken ex cathedra on that. In other words, divine inspiration from God. This God told me to tell you this is bad. That's not the case with capital punishment. The church, the leaders of the church are against it, but the doctrine of the church is not. It's the same thing with this. Leaders of the church are moving. The doctrine of the church moves more slowly. It's lag. So yes, he's moving it, and some of what he says, like he's on your side of the economic argument, right? He's for entitlements. He's for a lot of public spending. On the other hand, he is for love. He's for instead of being against people who you think are living in sin in whatever way they are, loving them. Jesus did not tell those people to go away. He loved them, right? He ate with the taxpayers and so forth.
So, finally tonight, novelist John Grisham was at the center of a controversy this week on child pornography. In an interview with The Telegraph, Grisham criticized the U.S. legal system for its harsh sentences for people who view child porn, but who do not engage in misconduct with children. Grisham later apologized after getting pilloried on social media. So, gentlemen, was an apology appropriate, or was there truth in what Grisham said?
I'm going to get pilloried as well. But here's the thing. If you read Grisham, the entire statement that he said, he was talking about, as I understand it, he was talking about a sting. He was talking about an actual site that was set up by Canadian law enforcement that featured 16-year-old girls. And when someone clicked on that, they got a visit from the Canadian police. My question would be, why on earth is any police enforcement anywhere in the world putting up child pornography for the express purpose of doing a sting? I mean, why would you do that? I actually think that when you take him in his proper context, what he was saying was that there is a difference between a person who observes pornography maybe once or twice, and a person who is actually molesting. I think if you asked him about the people who produce it, he would come down on them like a ton of bricks, just as we all would. But that wasn't the issue. The question was, do you throw a person in jail for multiple years? And, we have cases where we have people who have been, some of the cases of what we've done with people who are viewing child pornography has been over the top. We ought to look at different ways of, number one, addressing the viewers of that. And then we obviously with the people who are either producing it or who are recruiting children into it, we have a whole other system of punishment to confront that with.
Yeah, it's very similar to this country. Remember that show that used to air on NBC and MSNBC, To Catch a Predator?
Yes.
When Chris Hansen would set up these sting operations, young girls supposedly were in this house, and guys would call up, and they hadn't seen her, and actually, but she was really an adult disguising herself as a 13-year-old or whatever. And these guys would call and come over and etc. and be all set up, and the cops would be waiting outside to arrest them at the appropriate time. But the advantage in that show is that it got the predators off the street. You could call it entrapment if you want. It's kind of like the other show on MSNBC called The Bait Car, where they try to catch guys who are car thieves, and they set up a bait car. They do everything in their power to make these dudes off the street want to steal this car, leave the keys in the car,
Visibly.
and everything, and To Catch a Predator is very similar. It's a total sting operation, and they're enticed to do this. And to me, I don't have a problem with the sting situations because, if you can catch them there, and the setup, then perhaps they're in prison, therefore they can't act on, a young child, an impressionable kid.
It's designed to prevent.
It's more preventive medicine. You're making a preemptive strike. You're getting these guys off the street, and this is what John Grisham said initially. We have prisons now filled with guys, 60-year-old white men in prison who've never harmed anybody and would never touch a child. But they got online one night and started surfing around, probably had too much to drink or whatever, and pushed the wrong buttons and went too far and got into child porn. They deserve some type of punishment, but 10 years in prison, come on. There's so many of them now, sex offenders, that they put them in the same prison like they're in a bunch of perverts or something. He's trying to increase the margins.
So you surely agree with his criticism of the harsh punishment for the people who are watching the child pornography.
His basic argument, of course, is that a guy could be on the internet and just so happen, to end up on a child porn site. Because a lot of times nowadays with the internet, if you type in the one wrong letter or number on a URL, it'll take you to some of these sites, unwittingly.
Yeah.
And before you know it, hey, it's too late, and that seems to be, his argument. But he of course got pilloried for that, vilified for that, because
So you feel he didn't need to apologize?
A lot of family people. No, I'm not saying that. He needed, instead of an apology, what he needed was a clarification. A contextual clarification.
Brian?
I'm not comfortable with the government offering people crimes to commit. Really, in most situations.
Isaiah, you agree?
Yeah.
And I totally disagree. I totally disagree.
I mean, I see your point, but it's just like
totally disagree.
I think the real bad guys in this,
Yeah.
the people who didn't just get drunk and click the wrong thing, they'll identify. They'll do it a bunch, and you'll be able to say this guy did it too. He didn't do it once. He didn't do it 6 times. He did it 200 times.
Right.
Okay, he's a guy we got to get.
If you can catch a guy before he does physical harm, catch him. I don't care. I'm sorry.
And
child
gloves off
predators, car thieves,
on anybody who has to do with making, selling, purveying, showing that film.
Right.
Pound them. No end, no mercy.
Right. Yeah. I like a
So
preemptive
whether
strike.
you're
I'm all for preemptive strikes.
producing, watching, participating in, are they all to receive the same punishment?
Now, he may have a point about that. I mean, if a guy molests a child, should he get 10 years? He gets 10 years, and then another guy who just looks at it on the internet site gets 10 years.
Right.
I think Grisham has a point about that.
Right.
The thing is that, of course, he got caught up in a situation where, when you lend any kind of voice to letting somebody off easy in a child pornography case, people's antennas will skyrocket, like my favorite Martian, big time. And he has to worry about his fan base, because he says something like this and loses a lot of book sales. He has a problem.
We expect our authors to be a little.
He has a problem.
But
he makes a lot of public appearances. His book sales go, nosedive. He probably felt he had to do that, to help save his career also.
The thing is that, these are very serious issues, and, the three of us can have a reasoned conversation about those 3 issues. When you make a statement like Grisham made, and then it gets chopped up into 140 characters on Twitter, and it loses the ability to have the sane, nuanced conversation.
No nuance and clickbait.
140 characters. That's why he had to make a contextual clarification. That's what he had to do.
That's right.
Instead of an apology.
Okay, let's take some questions from our virtual audience. We have Terry Boone, who wants to know, Individuals with Ebola are quarantined, yet people who might have it are allowed to travel freely. What kind of sense does that make?
That I don't think that's 100% true. What is happening is that there are a number of people. Probably the most notable example is NBC News reporter Nancy Snyderman. She was a doctor who went to West Africa. Who's also a reporter. Went to West Africa. Her cameraman contracted Ebola and is currently in treatment. She has self-quarantined, and in fact, either her or a member of her crew left the quarantine. There was an immediate uproar, and she had to apologize and say, "Look, that was a breach and it was unacceptable, and we won't do it again." So I think it's not that people who have symptoms, in one sense, can travel freely. I think, but on the other hand, we do have a system in which, if given the epidemiology of the virus, is it possible that some person somewhere who can touch someone who was in the very earliest stages of having the virus, he not knowing, I not knowing, and
I think not. I think you
actually
have to start doing.
Even that, under that scenario, would be very difficult, because the way that virus works, it's pretty obvious that the person is ill before the virus is highly contagious.
Yes, that's what they say at this point.
Right. And what do you do when you're ill? Do you go out clubbing? No. You go home and lay down, right? So I think you're going to see, and especially now with the raised awareness, I don't think you're going to have a lot more people running around spreading it. I think anybody who thinks they might have been in that position is going to be
act responsibly.
Yeah,
right,
please,
exactly.
doctor,
Right.
help me. I have something that might kill me.
And also, isn't Rick Perry trying to enact a ruling that healthcare workers involved with Ebola are not allowed to travel? He's trying to have a decree on that, because that's what happened with nurse number 2, and that to me is a good idea. And also the restriction of travel from abroad. Also, just you mentioned before flights from West Africa, United States. You can count on one hand each week. I say just cut them all out. Zero.
Except you have to listen to the Council of Healthcare Workers, and the Council from Healthcare Workers has been that an absolute ban on flights they work against actually getting people into, number one, it would work against people getting into the affected areas. Number two, it would just simply encourage people to do workarounds. I mean, we've seen that in every time where you try to come down, you get workarounds which are far worse than just saying we'll do screening. Let's let the screening work. There aren't that many flights. It's not that difficult a job.
And really, you're talking about 3 figures people per week trying to get from West Africa to the United States. You're talking about fewer than 1,000 people a week.
Okay. We could probably take some more questions from that, but we've got to move on to our most underreported story of the week. What should we have heard more about this week in the news? Isaiah.
My favorite underreported story is something that's happening in New York State right now, where the State Department, the State Wage and Hour Board is beginning to hold hearings around the state over whether the tip minimum wage should be eliminated. There are currently 8 states that don't have a tip minimum wage. In other words, a restaurant worker gets whatever the minimum wage is in that state. In many places around the country, the tip minimum wage is at the federal $2.13 an hour, which means that a person has to make up the rest of that in tips. And one of the leaders of a woman named Saru Jayaraman, who is the head of Restaurant Opportunity Centers United, was at a function that my organization, the Campaign for America's Future, sponsored this week. And she was able to make her case in front of New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio, who was also at that event, to try to get him to on board in favor of eliminating the tip minimum wage. If New York decides to go that route, that will be huge and will be a big blow to the National Restaurant Association. So it bears watching.
Yeah, something like that in New Jersey going on too.
Mm-hmm.
Is having a similar thing.
Anyone else have an underreported story they'd like to bring up?
I miss all the good parties. I think it was yesterday, the day before, there was the Grass March came to town. It was people riding from the west to raise awareness of, you might have seen some horses around town. They were through Georgetown and so forth.
Yes.
And they were here to rough treatment by the BLM. What happens to these guys is when this makes the news, it's because it's Cleveland Bundy. You know, and he's real easy to characterize. And
The guy in Nevada.
yeah,
Right.
okay, but you know, there's a big problem there about who has the rights and how much.
Right.
Like we own 90% of Nevada.
Right.
You know, I'm
federal
for
government
preserving.
does.
Yeah,
Right.
federal government owns
Right.
90%.
Right.
Now, so basically all that's left is Vegas and Reno, and the rest of it is just. It's nothing. No one can make any money there. No one could live there. Nothing can happen there.
Desert.
Because it's fenced. You go out there, you drive through it. It's barbed wire
Right.
fences, and
Right.
they don't let you in. It's like, okay, you need some of that. There's Yucca Mountain. There's some, you know, they test nukes up there, Area 51 and so forth. But you do not need you don't need 90% of Nevada. And I think that you know, this like make everything off limits needs a look, and I think that's part of what happened this week. And there was a good party. They got met at the Capitol and free beef brisket for all because they're cattlemen.
Right.
So it was
Cattlemen do it better.
and I missed
Finally.
out. And it's like, when I read that, I'm like, man.
Finally, Gregory, did you have an underreported story this week?
Yes, there's a very interesting story in the Atlantic magazine. It's about the state of the black community in the United States. It's interesting because it shows an income inequality gap within the black community itself. And what the Atlantic did was, if you take black folk in this country and create a nation, then it would be, in terms of GDP, it would rank number 46 in the world. In this hypothetical black nation kind of thing. But that's one side of it. The other side is that when you talk about black poverty in this country, it's essentially on a par with Iraq, which is very concerning. That's not good. And if you also count, standard of living, when you account for factors such as education, household income, wealth, and all that, and black folk in this country lag way behind. That again is also on a par with some of the poorer countries in the Middle East, such as Iraq, and also on par with many of the Palestinians, which is also not good. And also, the New York Times had a story which basically got very little play, that maybe indeed, after all, there were weapons of mass destruction. But of course, because Ebola and ISIS dominate news, you don't hear about it. And one of the reasons they discovered this is because many of the soldiers, started suffering from strange illnesses, and they discovered that there was sulfur gas buried in the soil in Iraq, and that's how a lot of the soldiers were infected. The problem is that were these chemical weapons in the soil from the first Gulf War or from the second Gulf War?
Well, the talk was always that he
President
buried.
Bush,
I think
which brings up the question: is President Bush really off the hook?
Right.
Was it for real? The WMD was it for real?
The thought was always that he buried it.
Mm-hmm.
And I always said, we didn't find it doesn't mean it wasn't there.
There, right? Exactly.
Yes, yes,
So
I'm sure that we'll hear more on the news.
That's what many conservatives, are saying.
Yeah.
I think the big question is what the source of that was.
Yeah.
because it's quite possible that some of the stuff that we made and sent over
Yeah,
there.
that's true too.
Right.
And, and the other thing is, you know, when he put that coalition together, that was 40-something real partners
Right,
who
right.
everybody did ante up, money, soldiers,
right.
material.
Exactly.
Okay, so a lot. If they were wrong, that's a lot of people who do this for a living were wrong.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And
We will
yeah.
hear more on that,
Yeah.
I'm sure, Gregory.
Right, definitely.
Thank you for those underreported topics. You had 2 this week.
Yeah.
So thank you, everybody. Unfortunately, that is all that we have time for this week. I thank you for watching The Square Circle. Thank you for joining us. I'm Nan Khan, and we'll see you here next week on The Square Circle.